many railroaders showed up today? How many came to hear Widge and Carolyn's presentation today? Oh, sorry, we tried to get the word out last week. There was one railroader who showed up to the program. We tried to get the word around. We did have to switch, and sorry that happened, but we just couldn't avoid it. Jerry and Betsy had a death in their family, and we had to switch around. So, enjoy the railroad program. Just by way of introduction, if you haven't been to the original courthouse, we invite you to stick around afterwards. We have coffee and cookies downstairs, and if you want to check into the old jail cell and the other things that are to see downstairs, and look at the displays up here. Jerry has set up a number of railroad pictures from his other presentations, and they're in frames on top of all the tables here in the upstairs. Take a look at them, and also, while I'm thinking about it, Jerry put this schedule downstairs. If you've missed his programs leading up to today's program, you can catch up on all of those because he'll be presenting them at the Discovery Center on the third Saturday starting in March. So those programs all will be presented once again. And this is number 6. This is the longest running series in our 30-some years of doing these Saturday programs. Jerry's responsible for now the 6th one in a row. So we thank him very much for being a very important part of our history series here. There are a couple things I want to say. First of all, we pass these bags around and ask for donations. We don't charge for these programs, but there is a certain amount of expense involved, and we'd like to give you the opportunity to help to support the courthouse here and the work that we do. Now, the other way of doing it is by joining the courthouse, becoming a member. And if you noticed on the table, there were applications for membership, and I put some on this clipboard, and I'm going to send that around and tell you about it in just a minute. But that is the other opportunity. You can either put a one-time donation in here or make it a donation for the entire year. You will be a member, you will receive newsletters, you will be kept appraised of other programs that we do here at the old courthouse. So I'm going to start these around, and then just mention that these other programs coming up, we do have Steve Betcher doing the program next week on Oregon and Civil War history. Steve is a reenactor. He'll be all dressed up in his woolen Union, I was going to say Union suit, but no, it's a Union uniform. Maybe with a Union suit underneath. They like to do those programs in the wintertime because in the summer it's really hot and scratchy. But Steve will have a Springfield rifle to show us and other artifacts. Typical life of a soldier, but also talking about Oregon and its particular role in the Civil War. And then the final week, that's why I want to send this sign-up sheet around. Dr. Malin Kriegel lives up on the route of the Steptoe campaign, which was the precursor to Colonel Wright's campaign against the Colonel Lane Indians. He's discovered very interesting things through copies of the field maps and field notes taken by Theodore Kolecki, who was the topographer who went along with Colonel Wright. He's traced out many of these places, the routes and the campsites, and is wanting to explore some of them that are right here in our vicinity. Probably coming up early on the Friday before his program, and then staying the Sunday after that. And he would like to know who's interested in going along with him. We would like to know, and we'll put you in touch with him if you will take time to sign up here. So I'm sending this around. There are some membership forms there if you'd like to join the original courthouse, but I'm going to send that around. If you put a name, an email address, and a phone number, we will get that information to Dr. Kriebel, and we will pass that information on to him, and he'll be in touch with you, and we'll get those field trips organized. So, I think that's about enough for me to say here. As I've already mentioned, Jerry is the longest running series of programs that we have in these history forums, and we're looking forward to Jerry's talk today. He's going to tell us stories of the Deschutes. Jerry's hand.
Thank you, Carl, and I want to thank Widge and Carolyn for their willingness to switch with me. Our program, they came in last week, and let me come in this week. I appreciate it, and you arranging. I appreciate that, Carl. The program today is kind of in three parts, 3 seconds, and we're going to make 3 trips up to the Deschutes. I hope this simplifies it, doesn't complicate it. We're going to look at the tunnels on the Oregon trunk side, where we're first. We'll come back, look at the tunnels on the Union Pacific tunnels going also up that river, then come back a third time and pick up some incidental stories going along. And in each case, we'll start roughly at the Columbia and end at North Junction. So that's kind of the agenda today. Things working here. Edward Harriman was one of the builders. He built the Union Pacific route on the east side of the river, as you know, and James Hill was the builder of the Oregon Trunk on the west side. And we've heard me tell these stories before, so I'll keep this part brief. But James Hill always seemed to be ahead. He always was a little smarter and a little savvier, and one thing he did right was to hire John Stevens to be his chief surveyor and route finder. John Stevens worked for James Hill, and they built the Great Northern Railroad from St. Paul, Minnesota to Tacoma. He found, for route purposes, the Mariah Pass at Glacier Peak, and also a route over, named after him, Stevens Pass in the Cascades. And in 1905, he was hired on James Hill's recommendation he was appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt to reroute and re-engineer the Panama Canal as we were beginning to build that. And it was after that he worked on the canal for a couple of years. He came back to Oregon and then went to work for James Hill again on the Deschutes. So he's an important part of this of our local history. Well, we start out with the Columbia crossing the bridge, and then we're going to look at the tunnels on the Oregon trunk side. And this is tunnel number 1, the west portal, about a mile east of Celilo Park. And there's the east portal. And there's an old-time picture showing the construction. It was hard work building those tunnels. They used hand-held drills, pounded in and chisel out a hole and pack it full of black powder and blow it up, and then they'd scoop the stuff out of these little carts. And one of the men doing this was a guy named Charlie Araby. Charlie Araby, and this is my first story, is the father of Joanne Wagenblatz. And he was assigned to work on all the tunnels, but especially on tunnel number 1 here. He worked on it, and let me come back to it in just a moment. This is another era. The guy on the right at the top is Leon Elliott. He's the uncle of Ed Elliott. Many of you know Ed from St. Vincent de Paul here in town, and longtime president of the gorge. And Ed shared that picture with me. But back to the tunnel, and there it is now on the who knows what?
Just go up to next.
Oh, that's right along the highway.
Tunnel number 1, Charlie Araby put crews on either end of the tunnel. There's a curve in the tunnel, and he started at opposite ends, and when they met in the middle, they were about 3/4 of an inch off. And one of his workers said, "Hey, Charlie, we did really good." And Charlie said, "No, we didn't. It should have been perfect." That was how good an engineer he was, and how important his work was to him. Well, I parked out there at the east tunnel portal for a while one morning, waiting for trains, and there's the tunnel on the left, and my pickup sitting there alongside the road, and while I waited those 3 hours, about a dozen trains went by me on the other side of the Union Pacific. That's where the traffic was. But finally, I had success, and this engine came out. Is that distorted? Does that look okay? Distorted from this end, I guess. I said, "What's this single engine running up the Deschutes for?" So I sat there for a while, and after a while it came back. And it was pulling this work train. This is a train that all these fat cars carry ties, and there's a self-loading and unloading fork or wrapper up there that runs along those cars and unloads new ties, or they can load onto the cars the old ties. And it was a couple weeks before this was up at Shear. This engine was bringing it back into port there at Sarnia Wish Ramp. And after a while, I had even more like a real train came through. And there's 3 or 4 trains a day, generally each way on the Oregon trunk. And but they're not scheduled exactly, so if you want to see one, you got to wait for it and hope for the best. Then we move on to tunnel number 2. That's it. On your mileage map, it shows Cedar Island, Horseshoe Bend, milepost 40, twin tunnels and bridges. This is an aerial view of that tunnel. It's hard to get a shot of that tunnel because it's right there. Here's the road over that route, going down to Max Canyon. And here's the railroad coming in from the other side. Crosses the trestle there, comes through the tunnel, comes out here, goes another trestle. And this brings me to my next story, which is from John Byers. As a kid, John loved to fish, and I think he still fishes. But he and a friend at one time decided they wanted to go out and fish on the west side of the Deschutes. That's away from where all the other fishermen were. And but the only way to get there was to get on the tracks at Shears Bridge and walk the track about a mile and walk this trestle right here and head through the tunnel, come out on the other side, and another trestle, come over here, get back off the tracks and go fishing. And they did that. That worked fine. After they got through fishing, they realized they had to get back. They had to do that again, and they were a little more nervous. They got up on the tracks, and that's a long trestle, that first one. It's about a 500-foot tunnel, and another long trestle. And what if a train comes? They kind of panicked, and they realized but they were stuck. That was the only way to go, and so they hustled and worried and sweat and got safely across, and they made a solemn oath to each other they would never do that again. This is a close-up of that south port. You can see a bit of it. That's about all you can see from the road there. There's a bit of the bridge. And this is an old time picture that shows the trestle on the north side, and on the other side, the train out actually headed into the tunnel. Both railroads, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, built tunnels through this particular ridge. And there's a train coming out of that tunnel heading south. And this is the road up above where you can drive along and watch them as they go. We've all heard the story of Harry Carlton and his bridge building and his tunnel building. And this is tunnel number 2 that he built. And I've told some stories about him, but I have another one to share this morning, or today. This is from Eldon Wagon Blast. He said that after Harry had married the Johnson daughter from Dufur and been away and come back to Dufur and settled there, he was over in Sherman County one day and he apparently decided to go and get a haircut there at Grass Valley. And that was working fine, and he overheard these other guys talking lots of old history, you know, there was this guy that came into our county and really screwed things up with our trying to build a railroad. They said, you know, that guy ought to be strung up. And Harry was sitting here unbeknownst to them that he was a guy. And he very, very quietly finished, got the haircut finished, paid, left, and headed out of town as fast as he could go. Well, this is tunnel number 3 at Dance. Now we're up river above Moppin. Milepost, what have we got, 50? 60?
Jerry.
Yeah.
Jerry. Dan, it's not 467.
Okay, now this is, okay,
It's
thank you
actually
for that.
It's actually 67.
Yeah, I need to correct that. I've got some of my mileage figures off of the river mileage from voters, and some of the railroad mileage, and so sometimes I don't always get it quite correct. But anyway, it's a dam. And that tunnel was built, still being used by the railroad, and we'll have some more pictures of it here a little bit later. There's a closer-up of it. And my only story is this image of Lloyd Roberts posing in the tunnel entrance. You can kind of get the perspective of how big that tunnel is. And Lloyd, was that your father?
That was my dad's brother. This is his son and daughter sitting right here.
Oh, okay. That's your dad that's up there in this photo, 1928. All right, I have to ask you folks here to verify that. And then we move on up the river a little further, and we come to tunnel number 4, which is between North Junction and South Junction. And at this point, Bill had crossed the Deschutes at North Junction because the building conditions were really bad on the west side. For one thing, it was Indian reservation. They had to get permission. That wasn't going to be easy, but they also had some real difficult rocks. So he built a bridge and crossed the head of Harriman. I was saying the hill was always ahead. And when Harriman got there, here was Hill building on his side of the river. But they went through another federal lawsuit in the settlement, and they shared that track together. It goes 11 miles from North Junction to South Junction. This is the north portal of it, and this is also the north portal. It's right here. This is an aerial view. This is the railroad. It kind of wanders around and goes back over here to the river, and you can see the railroad after it goes through the tunnel. There's the railroad up there on still on the east side of the river. Makes a big turn there. And this is a very prominent rock in the river that voters all recognize as a landmark. And this is the portal on the other side of that tunnel right here. Again, an aerial view, and there's the railroad. And my story here is told here with me by Ron Nelson. Many of you know Ron. He was head of the family and children and family services here for years in our county, retired now. In 1948, he and his brother and his dad wanted to go fishing, and this was just about the spot where they wanted to go, right along in here. But to get there wasn't any way to get there except by train. So they apparently this was happened fairly often back in those years. They drove into Moppin, got there at midnight, waited for the freight to come through, and stopped, boarded the caboose, rode to North Junction, and had rented a cabin from the rail walker that lived at North Junction and had 3 or 4 cabins that he rented out. And they left their stuff there and walked through the tunnel and up along to this area, went fishing, did that for 2 or 3 days, and back through the tunnel each day, their cabin. And when they were ready to head for home, they talked to the railroad employee, the rail walker, and he'd flag the next northbound train, and they'd get on it and ride back to Moffett. Well, there's one more tunnel on the Oregon Trunk route that isn't, it's the only one that's not used anymore, and it's down at Warm Springs. This is the route, the old railroad route of it. That route was closed in 1923, and when they put the 2 railroads together, they abandoned the Oregon Trunk section along here, and the tunnel down at Warm Springs, there's the south portal in the sunshine, still out there, and for many years it was used as a potato warehouse. And we walked through it and come out on the other side, and there's the north portal, a little harder to see, but it's been abandoned for about 90 years, and it's still there. Okay, now we go back to the Columbia again, and we'll work up the other side of the river with Harriman's tunnels. And he also had 5 on the river. There were 5, each railroad had 5 along the river. There were couple of additional tunnels after they pulled away from the river. I didn't include those in this program. And there's tunnel number 1. That's milepost 32 at Beaver Tail. You see Oak Brook there. It's right near Oak Brook. And that's the way it looked probably from the time it was built till they tore out the rails in about 1950 or so. Or they tore the rails out in 1936. So this was probably back in the days when they were still using that tunnel. And this is the approach to that tunnel from the north, a big cut to get to the tunnel. The tunnel isn't there anymore. It had the same fate as several others did along the route that were abandoned. The Army was testing some of their ammunition and their munitions and explosives and stuff, and they got permission from whoever was in charge of these tunnels to use them and blow them up, and so this tunnel disappeared in that process. And the next tunnel did too. This is back at the Twin Tunnels. This is Harry Carlton's tunnel. The tunnel on the other side of the railroad was over in here somewhere. It's, so oblivious, I couldn't spot read it where it was, but it's only 100 feet away from the second tunnel there. And they bore through it and we headed on up the river. And then we come up through Moppin, and the train stopped there, and we come to tunnel number 3. This is, help me in on that mileage. This is right at the gate, Willis. Mile was about 60?
Milepost 62.
62, okay. This tunnel, this is the portal facing north that you come into, coming from Moppin. This is where it comes out on the other side. And that tunnel went the same fate as those first 2 tunnels on this route. But the difference was that when the Army wanted to experiment with this explosive in this tunnel, the folks that were the ranchers up there in the Deschutes Club who had fishing property up there said, well, you can't destroy that tunnel unless you give us another way to get up the river, because going through that tunnel was the only way to get where they wanted to go. And so the Army agreed to build a shoe fly. Now here's what's left of the tunnel, the landslide. The tunnel's right down here. And there's the gate that marks the entrance to the Deschutes Club, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And there's the shoe fly. Here's where the tunnel was, right in here. And this is the shoe fly around that ridge, the other side, so that folks who had property up there could still get to it. And then we move on along up the river a little further, and we come to tunnel number 4. This is still used. You can see the road goes along there, and Willis and Dale and their family took me up there last spring, and I got these pictures. I was really excited about that. It was one of the best days of all of last year for me, Willis. I really enjoyed that trip. And this is approaching tunnel number 4, and you get a little closer, and you can see there's timbers on it. They timbered it up and had it kind of reinforced. But there was a catastrophe last summer. The fires up on the Warm Springs came down across the Deschutes, and those timbers caught fire. And there's the fire raging in the tunnel. The firefighters were there, but they didn't see much point of trying to fight because it'll burn itself out, which it did eventually. And but the BLM and the Forest Service and contract firefighters were all there. And these pictures I got from the BLM office in Prineville. Jim Beaupre was the guy that agreed to send me the pictures. I tried to reimburse him for him. He said, no, I said, you do the programs for us in Waupun at the BLM Park. So I got those pictures for free. I feel kind of good about that. It was quite a blaze there for a while. When it finally burned out, that's what it looked like when the fire was out. It was all mucked up with a lot of stuff that had fallen through and fallen out. And there's a closer view of it. But within a couple of months, they were able to muck out all that stuff, because that's the only route on up the river from downstream. And I forgot what I was going to say. One more thing about that tunnel. Well, maybe it'll come. And then this is a firefighting helicopter, that same fire that Jim also sent me. And there it is down there in the river, sucking up water. This wasn't fighting the tunnel fire, this was fighting the fires on either side of the river. And when we head on up the river a little further, and this is the trains across the river, and this is what I was going to say, was that train traffic was disturbed and delayed for about a week and a half after that fire in the tunnel, because there's other fires burning along there, and the trains for that week and a half only moved at night. And probably for the first couple of days and nights, they didn't move at all, but they got moving after a while and finally back on the schedule. And there's tunnel number 5, mile post 69, just before you get to North Junction. And there weren't any timbers in that. Apparently the fire didn't hit that, but it's a drive-through tunnel, and we worked our way through it and came out on the other end. Enjoyed getting those framed pictures of the entrance of the tunnel, looking south. And then we have covered those tunnels, and we're heading on back, and we're going to go on back down the river. And for this third segment coming up from the Columbia, this is Harris Canyon Water Towers. We've seen that in the program I've done before. Just to remind you that this is a milepost 11, before and after their restoration. And then we move on up to Shear Bridge and Shear's Hotel. And this is, to me, it was an interesting thing about the fact that the hotel was there, the traffic for the hotel was moving from Sherman County down across the bridge into Wasco County and going on either direction or wherever. The hotel was built in 1893, and when the railroad was built in 1910, which was above the hotel site, it's right about in here. Let's see, the bridge is, along in here. But the two really never met. Traffic on the bridge was going east and west, and the traffic on the railroad was going north and south. So they were in the same location, but didn't really connect very much. And this is another train heading down towards the bridge there. But for the railroad stopped at Shear, which was just above that trestle, about a mile south of the falls, almost opposite of Shear's Falls. And my story on this one is told by Torabelle Moynihan. She drew this sketch of the way that she remembers the buildings there. There was the depot at the Shear, and there was the crew house, and this was the section foreman's house. That's where she lived with her brothers and sisters and her parents. Her dad was section foreman there for several years. And the story she tells is that she was just a little kid, and one summer she was bit by a scorpion, and it really got onto her arm really bad, and her father was needed to get her to the doctor, but it was over an hour's drive going up the road and down through Ty Valley and up over an old car and old roads, and so he just kind of broke the railroad rules and got her on the handcar, whipped her into Wapaton by rail, and got her to the doctor and got her taken care of, and got her back, and that's the memory she has of living there at Shears, is that right on the little motor car, with the doctor back. This is where those buildings were that we just talked about. There's kind of a white spot out in here. The backside of those buildings looking right down to the river. She said she remembers that too, and wondered how the building ever survived so close to the river and so close to the tracks. But that's where they were. And this is an area where there's that bridge we were talking about, and there's where the depot and second house was right in here. She walked up this road out of here, about 2 miles up to the school where she attended school. She had to walk up and walk back, and that was also part of her experience there. Then we move on to Tuscan. That's just before we get to Moffin. And this is the switch, and you see all the foliage here. This is known as Oak Springs now. Oak Springs, the fish hatchery is there, but before there was a fish hatchery, there was a railroad site and a railroad cistern. This cistern was built into the rock, and there's the outlet pipe, and the steam engines would pull up there and the pipe and reload their reservoirs on the trains. They haven't had steam engines up there for a long time, but they relined the cistern and still holds water. And until just recently, there was a stanchion down on the tracks along this area somewhere where they could load water on trains that were fighting fires, or fishermen could get water, and so on. So that's part of the Tuscan story. And another part of it is the powerhouse that's here, the hydro plant. That was built in 1903 and was the original electric source for the city of Moffett. 1903, they built power lines down to Laughlin and distribution lines. And the water came from the springs up on the hill there, and the turbine and the generator are in this building here. And this is the exit line, the discharge line for the water back up to the river. That's Lyle Curtis there, the head of the fish hatchery. And in 1943, Wasco Electric bought out Maupin Electric and took in charge of this powerhouse and used it until about 1957 when the Dalles Dam was built and Wasco Electric got cheaper power. But they laid out about $40,000 for this, all the lines and all the property that Maupin Electric had, and it became part of Wasco Electric. And we'll come back to Wasco Electric again a little bit up the road. And then we head on up the road, and but before we do, we're standing right by that powerhouse, and here comes the train. It's that close from where we were standing and looking at, and the train comes by, and there it heads on down the road. That's the engine in the back end. And when Ron DeWalt and I talked with Lyle Curtis about why don't we redevelop that old powerhouse and make it kind of a fishing cabin or a place where guys can get fishing tackle, or you might go in and buy a Coke or a cold drink. Well, we talked to some of the railroad guys, and said, nothing doing. They aren't going to have people park their boats down on the river, up across the tracks, and nothing doing. So that went out the window. And the upshot is that what Ron's working on, this is a little footnote now, is to have a nice billboard sign across the river on the road, opposite the powerhouse, describing what it is and its history. So we're hoping that'll happen. Well, in the meantime, we move on into Maupin, and we got a caboose. Some of you have seen this caboose or are familiar with it. You guys, Robert's boys certainly are, and some of the rest of you folks are from Maupin. It has an interesting story, and I got that story from Pat Tolentino a few years back by Sherry Holiday, who we all know is one of the county commissioners who lives in Maupin, former mayor down there. He said, we ought to have some railroad memorabilia in Maupin. And Pat got to thinking, he said, well, this old caboose, back in the 1980s when he was a lifetime railroad employee, and he stayed in it sometime at Bushram. He was a station at Bushram. And then later on it was taken down and parked at Bingen on a side spur. And in those years it had flooded and muckied up underneath it. And Pat said, maybe we can figure out a way to get the railroad to give us that old caboose. And so he contacted some of the head officials up in Seattle and described the situation and the plight of the caboose, what they had in mind, and they agreed to give it to him. Then they had to dig it out of the mud. After they got it out of the mud, it was still on the tracks, but they had to make sure it was track worthy before they could tow it anywhere. So they went through that process, and Sherry supported them on all that, and some other folks there in Maupin. And it was pretty simple to get it to Bushram because they just went on one of the local trains that was traveling cars all the time through there, and so they towed it back from Bingen to Bushram. And then the question was, how do we get it to Maupin? Because the trains that go up the Deschutes in those days, these days, are long, freight trains that are kind of through trains. They don't do the local stuff where they drop off cars and pick up cars. And Pat, at his best, knew the train master in Vancouver, and he explained what they wanted to do and why they wanted to do it and what it would mean to the folks in Maupin, and that this caboose probably had been through Maupin lots of times in its active life with SP&S. And he said, well, we just kind of looked the other way. And so when one of those freight trains was coming up the railroad, they hooked it on the tail end and pulled it into Maupin and left it on the siding, and that train went on its way. But they still had to get it up to the park. It seemed like there was always one more challenge. And they noticed, just incidentally, that he and Burlington and Northern insignia there, but before it was Burlington and Northern, it was SP&S, and that's colors that they expect to get painted back to one of these days. So anyway, Sherry said, the National Guard, sometimes they step up and do things with the community. It's kind of a community project. So she contacted them in Portland, and they agreed they'd come out, and they brought a big, long flatbed truck. And Batten and some of his helpers jacked up the caboose with timbers underneath it, and the jacks out on the side, And then they pulled the wheels out of the trucks so they could get it onto the flatbed. And they backed the flatbed and underneath it, about a third of the caboose was hanging off the end. But they figured out, they can still get it up the hill, all right? And came out from the railroad tracks up onto 197, you know, right where the BLM office is. About 120-degree curve going uphill crossways. And that was, they really swept that one, but they made it around the corner. And those National Guard guys knew what they were doing, and the power company was long, in case there were any wires deep, to kind of push up out of the way. They got it up to the park, up there, in upper Moffin. And then, and Pat had already laid some ties and two pieces of rail, so it was ready to sit down on the rail, and they, of course, the wheels weren't under it, so they put the bars back under it, and jacked it way up, and the highway department had agreed to bring up the trucks, the wheels. Oh, they said, oh, it's going to be a couple days before we can do that. And so that we sat there in those jacks on four corners for 2 days, and Pat and all the others helping him kind of sweat it, but it worked, and the highway department got up there, and they got those wheels back under it, and got them in place, and lowered it onto the track, and there it is in the park. So that's the story of the Moffin caboose. Thanks to Pat and Sherry and some other folks down there.
Yeah, Pat lived right across the street from it.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, I live right around the corner from it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that caboose is right there.
Yeah.
Okay, then we head out of Moffin, looking at a train going up river. That's under the highway bridge there. We come into Cambrai. Cambrai was the original depot spot for Moffin. The depot stood somewhere along in here, and then when they moved the depot, they changed the station name to Moffin down around the corner where the elevators are now. But this piece of track, here's the main track, and this is a siding, one of the few sidings long enough to put one of those long trains on when they need to pull off and let somebody else go by. And once in a while, you see that happen. There's one where the train's going up the river here in the foreground, and behind it, the train parked on that siding, waiting its turn to go the other way. We move on up the river, and here we come to the Roberts boys. And it's time for you guys to come on up now. Willis and Dale, and any of the rest of you that want to come, we got some stories here that they're going to help you with. Some of you met them last year. This is Willis, and here's Dale. And the others in the picture are their brother and sister. There's Lloyd, and the sister is Mary Lou. Those are the four folks that took me up there to North Junction last year. And I tell you, I don't know how it was for them, but I had a blast. I heard railroad stories all the way up and all the way back, and pictures as well. It was just a wonderful day. And we got near Nina, we stopped and looked, and Willis, one of you drew me a diagram. Now you kind of explain this a little. Here's the button. The pointer button right there. Let's see. I'm going to get around these.
Okay, let's see. Okay, our dad was a section foreman, made the section foreman at Nina. So that was the section house right there. That was the two-hole house. That was the bunkhouse for the section crew. This was an old wooden water tank. There was the water tower that they had when they had steam engines, which I was born in 1947. I was pretty small back in those days, but I think they stopped using steam engines on the Norfolk trunk maybe around 1953, 54, something like that. So,
Can I interrupt you for a second?
do what?
Speak up. In 1953, Union Pacific was still running the steam engine, but the SB&S had went to diesel up there. But in '54, they said no more water, and the Union Pacific started running.
So it was 54 that they stopped. Okay,
Yeah,
I was thinking of something.
that was the end of the water thing.
I was about 6 years old, so but I remember the steamers. I still remember that. Which one's about here, Jerry? That one right there. This one. Okay. So here's the Deschutes River, right here, and there was a pump house there, and my dad, there was nobody else around there, but this is 10 miles up the river from Auckland. So my dad had to maintain the water supply, and I remember just a little pipe going down there with him, and it was an old gasoline pump, and he would have to make sure that the water tower, or water tank was full, so when the steamers came up, they could stop and take on water. We had no phone service there. The only phone service was the railroad telephone. That was the little phone box on the side of the telephone pole. That's his feeder house where he had his little motor car, little one-cylinder motor car. The main track, the side track. And this here was the summer cabin for a guy, his name was Doc Shorts. And he had a little summer cabin up there. So when you look at this here, this on the west side of the river where the railroad track was, we lived there. Well, there's a river here, and there's a road down here that goes to Moffett. That's the way we got to school. We crossed the river every morning, every night in a rubber raft.
We got a picture of
There I forgot the date on that, what date? It says 52. 1952, so I'm 5 years old. That's me right there. That's our mom. That's our youngest sister. There's Dale. There's Mary Lou, and then there's Boyd. And our dad took that picture. So we go back to the other thing. So that's taken, see, here's an island, so we are right here. We're about right there, that picture's taken, my dad's standing right there taking the picture. And from the main line track to the edge of the Deschutes, I don't know, the river doesn't run exactly straight there, so it's roughly probably from the front of our house, right here to the edge of the water, down over the bank, 75 feet. Probably 75 feet, something like that. And we would carry the boat up. Here we had a place we carried up, put the rubber raft in, and then we'd go like hell to get across. We could make our land here. Yeah, fight the current. And we had a car right here. There was a little white spot in the car. We left the car. Just kind of an interesting deal. My dad was the boss. He went to work at 7:30 in the morning. Well, school started, I remember back then, probably around 8:30, 8:25. So he wasn't going to take us, drive us all the way to Malvern and get us down there at 6:30 in the morning, kind of set around for 2 hours. So he would leave, and we didn't always get out of the house at the same time in the morning. He would drive us down the road. He'd take us across, and then Boyd and Dale were over in Iowa, so they'd help him carry the raft back up here to the spot where he put in, and then we'd land over here. He would take us down the road, and he looked at his watch and say, well, I just about got time to get back to work. So he would just drop us off when we were on the road, and we just slide with the kids. So well, youngest sister wasn't in school there. And so we'd head walking down. Sometimes it's 10 miles from there, roughly 10, 21 miles from there to the school. At night, when we got out of school, we would walk up the road until we met him. Well, school got out roughly at 3:30. He got off work at 4:30. So we walked to bed all the way up here. We couldn't go home because he'd already had the rubber raft on the other side. So we went over there until he got off work. Come and pick us up. So would we create it for anything in the world? Absolutely not. Greatest life you could ever have. Unbelievable. No TV, no telephone, no cell phones, no computers, no nothing. Fantastic. Fantastic. And so are we going on?
I've got some more pictures here. Here's the gold, we saw that one. And then, that's,
I was going to get to that. I'm going to come back to that. So, our dad started out in the railroad in 1942. He had 3 brothers, my cousins there, their dad, Boyd, my uncle Boyd. And 3 brothers went in the war, World War II. My dad didn't pass his physical. He went out 3 times, didn't pass his physical. So he said, well, I got 3 brothers off in the war. I'll do the next best thing. A lot of military stuff was going by railroad. So he said, I'll go work for the railroad until the war's over, and then I'll go find me a better job. He went to work on February 9th, 1942, so that's coming up, whatever that is, 60 years ago, pretty close. And as it turned out, he ended up retiring in 1976, so he stayed there 34 years. But anyway, he worked on some different sections, down Lyle for a while, and then he finally got a chance to bid on the section at Nina because he was raised 4 miles up the river, what they call Dant now, which was free to come to that here. I'm getting okay, we'll wait. And so anyway, at Nina, this happened on March 1st, 1964. On Saturday night, in the middle of the night, I remember Dale hollering, get up, house on fire, house on fire. We all jumped out of bed, run out the door, the house was just full of smoke, flames shooting in out of the bathroom window. And we went outside. You see right there, that's the railroad track, it ran right along the front of the house. This is my bed right here. Right there, my bed right there. And we went out, went up on the hill, on the edge of the track there. And I was watching when we first went out the door, it was 2:58 a.m. And we stood there and watched the house burn to the ground. I think it was about 5 o'clock, something like that. A train was coming up the track. So the engineer, he pulled up and saw the flames, so he stopped and went, everybody was okay, he said, down there wouldn't burn to death yet. He said, okay, he saw a report it when I get to South Junction. The operator at South Junction. What do we do anything about it? It was a railroad house, they furnished the house, my dad was the boss there. And so these pictures here, I went up and took those myself. I think I took those probably about a week after the house burned. And I think we found, that was the chicken house we had. My dad built that out of old railroad ties. Right to the right there was an old, I think that's their house. I can't see it from here. And, but we had electricity and plumbing in the house by the end. But as a kid, my dad went there in 1944, I was 47, so I think Dale was 3.5 months old, I think.
Yeah,
When they moved in there. And we had no plumbing in the house, no water in the house, no electricity. The only lights we had was kerosene lamps. And I started school in 1953, and I remember in the first grade, I remember laying on the floor with some of the other kids on the floor, except the lamp was on the floor, and we lay down there on our belly. I don't know how much homework I did. First grade. But anyway, our house burned, and then my dad had seniority on the section from South Junction. So he did on that, bumped that guy out of there, and my dad went there and all 1964, he was there about 6 or 8 years, and then Pat Tolentino, he just missed a lot of, his dad was section foreman at Moffett. He retired, and my dad did on that section until it was closer to home. He stayed there for the entire, February 1976.
Was it how the fire started?
We don't know. It started out in back porch. Dale was out of school, in fact, he was working for Mill Moffett, and he got home, he had to work that Saturday night. And he got home sometime early morning, and there was no fire then.
I got to bed at 1:30, and March started at 3. But I think they only smoked somewhere on the back porch area somewhere would be done.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure what.
There's more pictures here for you to explain. That's the site today.
Okay, that's when we went up to,
Last year.
we went up there in May. That's, the, okay, those are the old, locusts. The old locust trees are still there. It's too bad that those rail cars are there, because that's where our house was. It sat right down in there, and it killed. It kind of singed the pop. There's some poplar trees on the side, 3 poplar trees on that side of the house. It killed those, but these locust trees, it's kind of singed them, but they lasted.
They survived.
That was 1964, so that's coming up to what, 48 years here. Next couple of years.
Can you please speak into the mic, because we've got some people downstairs and they're not able to hear anything you're saying.
Okay, we're gonna move on to Frida, but I got some more pictures for you here.
And this here is our grandfather, our dad's dad. He's the one that was at Frida. He was born in Moffett, about a quarter-mile up Baytown Street from the bridge right there, in the little house there. And he started working the railroad when they were building railroads at the Deschutes River. He came from Kentucky in 1884. He had an uncle out east of trying to build in this area. And he stayed with him, and then he started a homestead up there on Cherry Creek, and he was there, I think, 3 or 4 years, and had big cloudbursts flooding him out. He said, to hell with this, that's enough of this stuff. So he moved down to Moffett, High Valley One area, worked on a sheep ranch, so they started building railroad. And he worked the railroad, and I've got an aunt, my dad's youngest sister, she's what, 75 now, I was talking to her a couple months ago. And she said that she remembers him talking about he was in a railroad camp at Shears. And then that's my grandmother, our grandmother. They're both dead.
And the pictures here.
And where am I looking here?
1916.
Okay, there's our grandfather. This 1916. This is at Moffett. This is at Moffett. And there you see the railroad track. And I don't know what side of the river this is on. I think that's the river there, this is the railroad track, and I think that's the other railroad. Okay, there's our grandfather, there's our grandmother, and there's our dad right there. And he's about 2 years old. So there's a couple more pictures of him.
Whereabouts was that?
That Moffett.
The last picture?
That last picture, yeah. Okay, and this is at, well, I call it Freedom, it's Dan now. After we put, Dan Russ put the perlite mine in there, why they changed the name to Dan. This is our grandfather, he's Banjo. Our grandmother, Cora.
Little kid there in the front.
What's that?
Look at the little kid down in
Yeah,
front.
yeah, we'll get to him. I'm going kind of an age. Okay, here's our dad. His name is, I'm named after him. His name is Willis also. Here is Mabel, the next older. She was born in 1916. And there's Uncle Lloyd, Patsy and Terry's dad.
Oh, yeah.
He was born in 1919. And here's Burl. He was born in 1921. He died in World War II. I got his middle name, that's why I don't have the same middle name as my dad, or I'd be the third probably. And then here's Miller. Miller Fillmore Roberts. And that's the youngest boy. And the youngest girl, Irma, she wasn't born until 1935, so obviously she's not as good.
You see the railroad tracks in the background there.
Yeah, there's a railroad track.
Okay.
Right there by Freedom. And there's our dad, Will's dad, and Robert Student. There's our oldest aunt, Aunt Mabel, and then there's Patsy and Terry's dad, our Uncle Lloyd.
Okay. What else we got here? Oh, yeah,
And
tell us this story.
this here's the treasure picture. Anybody recognize who that is? He's looking at the top up there. That is Fred Meyer. That's 1928, May 1928. And if you look right over here, you can see where he signed it. January 18th, 1928. He used to ride the train up to Frida, and he'd stay with my grandparents, and he'd fish. I don't know, stay a week or so, whatever. And at that time, he just had a little sporting goods store in Portland. He didn't have anything like it's got now, and the old savings and all. He was just a little. I remember my dad said when he'd come up, he'd always bring him some fishing lures, some spinners and stuff like that. And this here is, so there's Fred Meyer, there's my Aunt Mabel, and there's Uncle Lloyd, there he passed his dad. And there is Uncle Bert, the died in World War II. And obviously my dad's not in the picture, because he took the picture.
That's the Fred Meyer store.
Yeah, no,
Okay, so, yeah.
good story, and nothing, no story at all.
And I live in Prineville. And Prineville, they remodeled their museum and expanded it, so it's a lot more displays in there. So I took this picture down and I know the historian real good. I took this picture down and showed it to him, and he said, hey, I've got a deal for you. He said, Fred Meyer Corporation donated $50,000 to the expansion of the museum. And he said, and I got a hold of the corporate office, I don't know if Fred's got any Maggie in the corporation or not, but I got a hold of them, and they donated $50,000 to the expansion project, so they said they'd like to have a picture of this. So I took it down, and they made a 30 by 30 picture, and put it in the corporate office.
All right. That's neat. That's kind of the rest of the story.
That's it.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'll pick up here. Okay, comment. Okay. Move on to Frida, which became that when they opened Perlite Mine, which is up here in the hill in 1945. These two guys from Portland came up, Dan and Russell, and began the mine. And so this building in the foreground is their headquarters. They worked at it for about 5 years. Perlite is not any. It's embedded in rock, and you have to crush the rock and distill it and refine it to get the perlite out, and it's used for asbestos, or not asbestos, but insulation and wallboard and so on. They worked at it for about 5 years, and then they decided they were going to close down. They shipped some of their perlite by rail, railroad track right out here. They had a siding, and we'll come to that in a bit. And they've shipped a lot of their ore back to Portland, but they did some initial refining here in Dant, And there's the railroad up behind it. This is the, that's the name of that creek, Eagle Creek, yeah, trestle across it. Somebody salvaged the dam tying off the railroad and have it on their own little place there. And there's the footings of the old warehouse and mining site where they crushed them and stuff right alongside the tracks, and then shipped it down to Portland. One of the real benefits to everybody else that lived up and down the track was that when they brought the line in, they needed lots of power, lots of electricity, and Wasco Electric agreed to build a line from Motlin up the river, and in the process, all of the places along the line got wired in. So that was a real boon to everybody that lived along there, and eventually then the power was sent on to North Junction. And I should add a little footnote that Wasco Electric in those days was run by Eric Johnson, who's the dad of Bill Johnson, and my wife's first husband's dad. And he was head of Wasco Electric, and he was also the guy in charge down there at Tuscan at that little hydroelectric plant in those days. So there's, again, another shot of the mine up on the hill there. And then we, on our tour last year, we crossed the river over to that because it's all on the other side of the river. And incidentally, there's tunnel number 3 on the railroad that we looked at a little while ago. And Willis here was our captain on the ferry boat, and took us across and over to the landing and up and saw some of the houses, met some of the people. Some of those folks you already knew, I guess. So
They knew them when they were kids.
yeah, it was a nice entree for me to meet some of these people. I wasn't just a strange guy walking in and didn't have any clout or any credentials or anything, but I stuck with these guys. They knew how to do it. And again, you can see the mine up behind on the hill there. And in 1951, Henry Kaiser took an option to buy that mine, but then he decided not to, so the mine was closed, and it's been closed ever since. And Bruce, you were saying you were up in that mine here a while back, and
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about that.
well, there's still a line there, but it's a small squeezing hole. I need about 30 pounds less weight than that guy in there. But, the reason why they shut it down, I read some books on it, and it was because fiberglass insulation came to be in.
Oh.
And no longer was that perlite viable.
Oh, okay.
They had a retort right there on that big cement slab.
Yeah.
Super hot, and they blow that perlite in there, and it pop up like popcorn. And that's the thing.
Okay, thank you for that additional bit of information. Anybody else want to comment on that mine?
Perlite.
And then we get a shot here. I think this is one of the BLM's shots. This, you see part of the houses along there. There are 9 houses built on the west side of the river to house the crew of the mine. And so that was quite a little home through there. And then we come to this story. Many of you know George Ward, and this is his son Eric of the Hinton Ward Ranch. Well, Eric is, his dad ran that ranch from the 50s to the 80s. And Eric sent me this picture, and I talked to him on the phone. I'm anxious to meet him when he was back from Oregon this summer. But to get, they brought sheep down to Dance, and then they unload the cargo and pick them up in Waukesha and for the lambing season, and they brought them down by rail. And they come out of this tunnel. This is tunnel number 3, and we're that close to the dam. And about the time that the train came through there, they uncoupled the last car, which was the one that he was on. And the train would speed up and get out of the way, and the car would be free rolling on down the track, and had hit this siding right here. There had to be a guy there to throw the fishing course after the train went by, but before the stock car came by. And there's a closer shot of it. And Eric was up there in that car, controlling the brakes. That's all he had. He didn't want it to go too fast or too slow. He wanted to make sure he got under the siding. And then when he got under the siding, he wanted to make sure he got stopped, because there's the end of it right there. So he did that a number of times, and that was, I collaborated that with Bruce here earlier today, and that was a fairly common way of throwing cars on the sidings along the route there.
Jerry, we went to school with Eric.
What did you at school?
Yeah, I think he was probably about 4 grades ahead of me. And then Eric and I went through basic training in the Army together.
I'm there, okay.
We shipped out there
Yeah,
twice.
yeah. And there's just another shot of him up there on the car, that brake wheel to manage it and get it stopped in time. They'd send sheep up in Wapanesha off of that car. And then they had a ranch, their ranch came down to the river, this is on the east side of the river. And this, the road here in the foreground is the old railroad route. This is a hay shed, and there are Two Springs ranches up the canyon a ways. They bring sheep down there, sometimes by truck, sometimes drive them down, and they'd be down there for lambing and so on. And then they'd take them, when it's time to get them out for the summer, they'd take them to drive them to North Junction, which is 3 or 4 miles up the road, and load them on the train there. They had 10 different summer, what do we call them, pastures for 10 different bands, including at Alpine and Christmas Valley and Chemalt and several places in between and up in the mountains. And they ship their sheep down there for the summer and get them out in the summer. So that's the sheep story on the Deschutes. And I've got to come back here, back to Dant for a moment. We're back downstream about a mile from that hay shed. This is one of the houses at Dant. Here's the railroad, comes around this way, and this road is the old railroad. And the story I want to tell about this one is that the Deschutes Club, you've all probably heard of that, it's a fishing club. I'm the Deschutes private club. They have a gate there, and I think I've got a picture of it. There's the gate back at tunnel number 3. And it's a very, very controlled access. And the fishermen, however, didn't get into this to start with. They had been fishing for a number of years up with, let me get my notes out here. Like Glenn Powers had a ranch up on Criterion, came all the way down to the river, including this nice little point here in the river. And these guys would come fishing and pay him $1.50 a car, go in through his ranch, drive down the hill, all the way from Criterion, several miles from off the road, keep fishing. And Powers was in need of cash in 1933, and times were hard, and he wanted to just sell a little piece of his property. He thought maybe these fishermen might be interested. So he sent his foreman to Portland and found them, and they were. And they rounded up 30 guys, each put up $50, and they bought this peninsula. And but the only way to get there was off his ranch, down the hill, a muddy road, and they built a cabin out there. It was kind of the clubhouse for the club. And the railroad was still operating on this side. This railroad closed in 1935 and 36. So they park here on the upriver side, uphill side of the tracks, to walk over to their cabin and do their fishing. And then they hoped it wouldn't rain when they wanted to get out of there, because they had to go back up that road. But in about 3 years, that railroad closed, and as it closed and they pulled up the rails and the ties, these guys had formed a club. They had a real close bond, and they were real intense about buying the railroad right away as it was abandoned. And they bought most of it there for about 10 or 12 miles. And that's how they gained access to the road, and they owned a lot of the property along there. And what isn't owned by them, there's a little bit of BLM. There's a few ranchers who had their ranch there for a while. And those ranchers worked together to maintain the road and keep the public out, because it was a great fishing site, and it still is. And so that's the story of the Deschutes Club. And then we move on to North Junction, and this was also part of our trip last May. Yeah. I was really excited about that trip. And there's where the two railroads come together. This is the current railroad. There's the bridge crossing the Deschutes. This is the route of Harriman's railroad coming in. This is about the way it must have looked when Harriman arrived here building his track, because there was already a track there. The deal that beat him to it. And they worked out that, negotiated, and shared the track together. And came in there and ran. There's a couple of homes that are there, quite a few nice homes in the area. And these cabins were built by the railroad, some of them for railroad crew and staff. North Junction was a pretty important spot when that railroad was running. And even after the one branch closed, they had a depot, a post office, 2 quarters, paymaster shack, telegrapher's quarters, and the principal sheep loading station. This is where the wards brought their sheep to put on the train. And there's the caboose, that will be my last story. That caboose came out to North Junction about 1959. They'd taken the trucks off underneath it, put it on a flat car, and hauled it up there by rail, and unloaded it. It was a fisherman's camp, apparently. In the 1996 flood, it got floated and moved down onto the property where it is now, which was belongs to John Hartson. And the fellow whose property it had been on, he said he didn't really want it back. He wasn't going to move it back. So John kind of inherited it by flood. And through the years, he's been working to kind of restore it. And they wanted to get it up off the ground because there weren't any wheels under it. And it was laying on the side for a while. And you see the windows are all boarded up. And there's the tail end of it. And there's John on the right there and his friend Sean working at it. They have it on the jacks and getting it. See, the windows are still boarded. But they got the windows back in it and they've got it painted. And there it is as it stands now. And the one thing they want to do now is get the SPS emblem on it. And that's what it was for many years. And that concludes my program. And we got to take one little train ride to get out of here. And from there, that's the end. If you ever want to these pictures, come up here and come over here.
Any questions or comments?
Every day John's working on that caboose has to be the hottest day of the year.
Oh, yeah?
I found a bunch of articles in the paper. It's way back. They're all right there.